Today's video has been filmed in real time. I'll be painting the eye of Emeline. This is a portion of one of my portrait painting courses. And I put this little snippet together to fulfill the request of one of my subscribers, Mario R. Mario asked to see a real-time video, brushstroke by brushstroke, a painting of any feature. So here we go, Mario. Welcome to painting the portrait of Emeline, female portrait with light skin tones. You'll want to start by putting on some nice music lightly in the background, something that makes you really happy. Step 2, you're going to want to pull up your image of Emeline on your computer. If you have Photoshop, pull it up in Photoshop so that you can use your grid lines. Place your easel with canvas next to your computer. We're going to find where we're placing the pupil of the eye. We're making a mark to see how far out away from the vertical grid line it will be. And now we're going to check to see how far down from the horizontal grid line it's going to be. So we can see our mark from the vertical line, and then we're going to see how far down it goes and just make a little dot there. I'm using a light blue just so it's not a very dark color. I didn't want to go in initially with the Van Dyke brown, just a light color and a value that you can easily paint over if you're not happy with your initial placement. Take your time getting this mark correct because everything we do from here is going to build out from the pupil. So get a little bit of a dark color on your brush, a small brush, and go ahead and make your pupil. No fear here. We're always going to be measuring and adjusting. It needed to be a little bit wider, so we're taking the pupil darkness out away from that vertical line a little bit, measuring it. It's perfectly set. Wide is good. Now we're going to look at how far the pupil is from that bottom grid line. So you can see measuring with the proportion tool is an easy, quick way to make sure that the marks we're laying down are staying in the correct position. Use your grid lines and then pick the area on the eye that you want to measure to the grid line, and they should be exactly the same on your canvas as they are on your computer screen. If you've printed out the image of Emeline, I hope you've put it in a protective sleeve and you've drawn your grid lines on top of the clear plastic. And now you can do the same measuring from the grid line to the feature as we're doing on the computer. Now we're moving out into the iris, which on Emeline is a little bit of a olive green color. So find a correct olive green mid-value color on your palette and just start working that around your pupil as you see here. It gets a little bit lighter towards the bottom of the iris, and then it gets a little bit darker again as we come up towards the eyelid. What I'm doing now is just making a slight transition to the edge of the iris from that lighter part of the iris. You can see there's a highlight in the upper left part of the iris. That means the light's shining into that area and it's going through diagonally and out the other side. So when you see the highlight in the iris, go diagonally across and paint that area just a tad bit lighter than the rest of the iris color. And it's best to keep your marks a little bit lighter than the end result you're looking for. We're going to have a refinement period at the end, and you can always go back and make areas a tad bit darker if you need to. Or you can just go in bold and fearless and make the marks as dark initially as you want to. The beauty of the selective start is you can get some really nice colors and brushstrokes initially, but there is a refinement period towards the end where you can go back in and bring things to a more finer finish. So don't be afraid to just have fun and get the initial features down and get things in the right place, because we can go back and fine-tune them and bring them up to a finished level that you're happy with. So this is a good time to take several measurements from the top lines, the bottom lines, the horizontal lines, and really make sure that your pupil and iris are in the right place. Looks good. We're ready to go ahead and extend out into the sclera. So the sclera is also called the white of the eye. And remember, it's never white. It's most often a cool color, and it can sometimes be a flesh tone color, but make sure it's not one of your warmer ones, unless of course there's some kind of lighting situation. A lighting situation that's going to cause a cast of a warm white of the eye. So when I tell you things like the whites of the eye are usually always cool, take that with a grain of salt. There's no rules. You can always break the rules when you know them to paint something the way you want it to look. So when you're painting the eye area, remember that it's a rounded object and there's an eyelid at the top, which is going to create a bit of a shadow, especially because our light source is coming from above and on the left. So there's going to be a little bit of a shadow here, which we're putting in with a tad bit darker gray. It's one of our darker mid values. So most of the eye is being painted in a mid value, most of the white of the eye. And there's a little bit of a highlight here in the white of the eye, just below the eyelid as well. And then the sclera gets a little bit lighter as we come down towards the lower lid. So we're going to keep moving our brush strokes down and bringing the white of the eye into the shadow area and into the corner of the eye, which is on the far right side of the iris and pupil. With selective start, you're going to continue to lay down brush strokes and connect them to one another. So you're always touching one brush stroke into another brush stroke. And then when you're making your transitions, especially in the eye, because they're going to be so tiny, you're going to overlap your brush strokes slightly. So the transitions are happening when you're moving from one value area into a new value area. And the more steps that you take into that transitional area, the better. And that's going to happen by laying down, say we're going from a light to a dark, laying down the light color, then taking a step towards the dark color with a slightly darker light, and then a slightly darker light than that, so on and so forth till you've made it into the shadow area. So you're just walking with slightly darker steps each time you lay down a brush stroke, moving into the shadow. It's kind of hard to see the transitions happening in the eye because they are so small, but when we move into the cheek and forehead area, you'll really be able to see what I'm talking about. So you'll see with the selective start, I really do paint slowly. So be sure you just take your time, put your brush stroke down, think about it if you need to, and then make your next brush stroke. There are no painting awards for painting quickly, only for painting well. Okay, we're moving into the tear duct. It's a little bit pink. It's kind of a neutral pink, but I like to err on the warmer side when I'm getting into the tear duct. It is moving into a shadowed area, and the shadows of our face are going to tend to be painted on the warm side. And make sure you get that really bright highlight in the tear duct area. That always makes a beautiful glint in the eye. And just because we mixed up our lights, mid values, and darks before we started painting doesn't mean we're not going to need some different colors as we paint along. So feel free to use some of the initial colors to mix up new colors if you find that what you have on your palette isn't quite the value or perhaps the temperature that you need for your next brush stroke. So going up under the eyelid, it's going to be a shadowed area. It's going to need some warm color. And what I'm seeing in Emeline's eye is there's a nice bit of red in that shadow line just underneath her eyelid. I'm seeing a little bit of blue just below that bright highlight on the white of the eye. When I'm painting the white of the eye, I kind of like to think of it as an opal. There's a myriad of colors that can show up in this area. It could be some light blues, light purples, light pinks, oranges, yellows. Just really look for the colors. So when you're looking for colors in your subject matter, you want your eyes wide open. And when you're looking at your subject for value changes, that's when you want to squint your eyes. So squint for values, wide open for color. So we went ahead and got another measurement there with our proportion tool, just keeping things in check as we're moving further away from that vertical line. So I hope you're enjoying our first portrait painting session. We're going to be bringing this right eye to a completion, and then you can take a break. If you want to go ahead and move into the next lesson, you can do that. We'll be moving across the face and into the left eye, following this side. All right, let's measure from the tear duct to that vertical grid line. And it's looking pretty good, so we're going to continue on. Now we're going to check it from the upper horizontal line. There we go. It was a tad too long, so let's just put a little skin tone mark there, recheck it, and now it's perfect. And there's a check from the inside of the iris to the tear duct. That's an important measurement. We're going to be checking that a lot, and we're going to be checking it against the left eye once we have that in place as well. So as we continue on, I don't want you to be so concerned with wondering, are you getting the correct color down? What I'm more concerned about and what I want you to focus on is making sure that you grab the correct value. We can always adjust the temperature or the hue of the color later on in the refinement period, but it is more helpful if the value is correct. And when I'm referring to value, I'm just meaning the lightness or the darkness of your brush stroke. Okay, we're going to start to put in a little bit of that lower lash line. I don't like painting my eyelashes one little hair at a time. I'd rather clump them together, and this is when I like to squint at my subject and just kind of put down what looks like the idea of a lower eyelash line. Now the right side of this eye is getting into shadow territory, so we want to make sure to paint thinly and with warm, dark colors. If you're using an underpainting with this starting method, you can actually let part of your underpainting show through here. It can serve as your shadow area. The master painters such as Rembrandt would often let the underpainting, dark underpainting areas show through for their shadows. So now that we have a good bit of the eye established size-wise from measuring with our proportion tool, if you need to zoom in to your image reference to really see the eye and see that lower eyelid and how it's got a little plane that faces the light, so it's a tad bit lighter just before it goes and rolls into that shadow area. Go ahead and zoom in really close, get a good look at that so you know what the structure looks like and what it is you're painting here. But don't forget to zoom back to your 31% zoom rate before you do any continued proportion tool measurement. If you don't zoom back to where you were initially, things will be horribly wrong as you continue your painting. In fact, I like to tape a little piece of paper or use a sticky note with the percentage of the zoom on my computer monitor so that it reminds me to constantly check that zoom percentage if I'm going in for close-ups and then coming back out. So when painting this upper eyelid, the lighter value area of it, I like to paint it a little bit wider than what I'm going to need because I'd like to lay some of those darker, warmer shadow areas right on top of that paint. I hope you've got some nice, enjoyable music playing lightly in the background. I love to listen to like Billie Holiday when I'm painting. So I'm continuing to work on that shadow area just underneath the eyelid and getting the white of the eye done. I want to have pretty much the areas that are below the eyelashes pretty close to ready to go before I start putting in any eyelashes. So if you think of painting the eye kind of like layers in Photoshop, you want to have the underneath layers, the background areas painted before you start putting things on top of it. So I'm going to want to get established that shadowy, warm lash line and the shadow above the lighter part of the eyelid before I go and put in some of these eyelashes. I've been practicing selective start for several years now, and it really feels natural to me. I think if you just continue to practice it, you'll get a really good feeling for it, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's just so rewarding to see an area come to full, almost completely finished in detail area before you move on to the next. I know it goes against a lot of what most people teach you when you're learning to paint portraits, but I believe that if you're careful with your initial measurements, there's no reason not to go ahead and paint an area perfectly before moving on. Also, there's no shame in getting an eye or a nose or even a couple of parts of the face completely painted and then deciding you don't like it, and you just wipe it off and start again. We've all done it. I'm sure I'll continue to have to do that once in a while, and it's just another part of learning and getting better. So since the eye is a rounded feature, the light's coming from the above left, there's going to be an area underneath the lower lash lid that curves away from the light. So if you think about an egg, and then the light's hitting it above, and then it's coming around, and as it curves underneath away from the light, it's going to get a little bit darker. So as we start to curve under, the light's going to be more of a neutral, and then it's going to change to a bit warmer as we get into more of that shadow area. So just think about when you're laying down your brush strokes here, taking a step towards either that neutral area or from that neutral area into that warmer shadow area to the right side of Emeline's eye. While you're painting your portrait, I want you to constantly be thinking about edges. So some of the features in the face will have a little bit of a harsh edge, and then some of the features are going to have super soft edges. You do want a variety of edges throughout your portrait. A lot of times I see beginning painters doing the iris with a really hard, dark outline around that colored area. And what is going to give you a better result in the end is if you can soften that line and let some of it blur into the white of the eye and blur into the highlight area. And be careful too with your lash lines. It's better to leave those soft than hard. All right, so I'm gonna look for how far down that lower lid shadow is coming from the upper horizontal grid line, compare it to the computer monitor, and see what adjustments we need to make, if any. And now we're seeing that it's coming down a little bit too far, so we're going to adjust for that. So here we go. We're going to move that eyelash, that lower lash line up a bit. So I'm just putting that in now, and then we'll come back in with some of our lighter skin tone and some of the white of the eye. And this is what I'm talking about, making these measurements as you go. The more often the better, so that things don't get too far away from you. And when you see that an area is getting away from you, like we just did, you want to correct it right away. And I know from all the portraits that I've painted that I tend to want to make my eyes too big. So I know it's a good idea for me to check as I'm going along and make sure that things didn't get away from me. So as you're painting portraits and you're getting more portraits under your belt, kind of make note of any areas that you tend to grow or shrink, and then you'll know to check those more often. So there we go. We've measured it and now it is in the correct spot. So we can continue on our course to painting Emeline's right eye. Now at the bottom of the sclera, I see a tad bit of pink there, and I just want to add a little bit more color in towards the lower part of the white of the eye. And once I put that in, we can just continue on with our lower lash line. So notice too that my marks that I'm making with my brush are pretty short because we're in a small area and I'm using a small brush. Typically you don't want your mark to be much longer than the actual length of the hairs on your brush. The other thing too, don't be afraid to actually put some paint down on the canvas. So I'm working on the transitions here, so we're moving from that darkest shadow area and coming across towards the light. So it's going to become a little more neutral and less warm as we get into the area that is not quite in the shadow but not quite in the light. And then as we move towards the areas of the light, it's definitely going to get a little bit cooler and lighter. Now I'm just going back in and I'm re-establishing some of the areas that I painted earlier, like a little bit of that blue in the white of the eye and a little bit more pure white into that highlight area. This is the only time in the painting of the portrait that I'll actually go in with a pure white. Now I'm laying this pure white brush mark in on top of already painted area, so it's not going to show up as a pure white. Now it would if the area was already dry, but since we're painting wet into wet, the white paint from that brush stroke that I laid down is going to mix a little bit with the color that's already there and not really read as pure white. Okay, we're moving into the shadow area of the corner of the eye. Remember, the area here is going to be painted in a warmer, darker color and with thin layers of paint. If you're using the underpainting, you can actually let a little bit of your underpainting show through for this area as well. Do you see how the area just before you move into the shadow is a bit neutral? It's almost a beige color. So we're going to make sure that we paint it that way on our canvas. Here I'm just pulling a little bit of that beige color up into that lighter upper eyelid area. Once we get some of this upper eyelid established, we're going to go ahead and start pulling in some of that shadow crease line. That's going to really help give our eye some nice 3D depth. Here's a look at my painting setup. I've got the palette to the right of my canvas, the canvas in the middle, and then the computer off to the left. Now if you're a left-handed painter, you'll probably want to reverse all of that. Canvas is still in the middle, palette on the left, monitor on the right. And you can see here that I've mixed up a few more intermediate colors as we've been painting, and that's normal. What you want to do a lot of times is sort of marry some of the colors to make your transition colors. So as you continue to paint your crease in the upper eyelid, try to keep your edges soft, and you want to transition upward towards the eyebrow by getting a little bit lighter but still using a warm color until you actually get yourself into a more lit area. But pretty much that whole upper eyelid area is still in shadow. There's some light hitting it, so it's going to be a little bit lighter, but keep those paint colors on the warm side. I will tell you this though, as a new painter, you want to err on the side of caution, and to do this, you'll keep your skin tones more neutral. It's always easier to glaze over top of a dried area and make it warmer. It's not really as easy to do the opposite. If some area is already warm, it's more difficult to go back in and make it neutral. You have to actually add layers of paint, and then that gets to a thicker area. Sometimes that's okay, but ideally err on the side of caution if you prefer, and keep your skin tones all, even in the shadow areas, on a more neutral side. And when I'm talking about color and I'm referring to neutral color, I'm saying that it's not really warm and it's not really cool. It's in between the two. Kind of like beige. I'm sure there's warm beiges and cool beiges, but think of just a regular in between flat beige. So even though you're keeping your colors neutral, definitely paint it in the correct value though. Very important. Okay, so we're rolling up over the upper eyelid. Think of this area as a cylinder. So the light is from above. You've also got the eyebrow kind of making a shadow on this area, but it's still kind of like a cylinder. It's rounded. So as it rolls into the crease, it's getting warmer and darker. As it rolls out away from the crease, it's getting lighter. The warm colors are starting to get a little less warm, and you see that highlight in the upper eyelid area that's just below the eyebrow. You want to get that so you are showing that it's round, but also that it has that curved effect going on as well. You could think of it as our cylinder is slightly bent and curved so that it's got a convex shape to it. It's kind of curved outward. So if you can look at our eye reference and imagine in your mind's eye that it's made up of little mosaic tiles, and each one of those mosaic tiles has a certain shape, has a certain color, and has a certain value. And you can think about those mosaic tile shapes and maybe try to imagine that the shape is an object that you're familiar with, and that way it'll help you to kind of understand the 3D effect you're looking for and getting the lighting effect that's coming from the above light and hitting that area. Okay, we're establishing that shadow area that's leaning inside towards the inner eye area. It's a nice warm shadow color. And you can always put down a mid value and then darken it as you go. So this is another area that you can use with your underpainting. Just let it kind of peek through and serve as the shadow in the corner of the eye area here. I think it's a good time to double check our measurement. Let's use that vertical line towards the outside of the shadow area. Check it to your computer and make any adjustments that are necessary. Okay, we're going to start to move into that eyebrow area. Eyebrows are often underestimated. They are extremely important when capturing the actual look of your sitter. If you are painting someone and you do not paint their eyebrows correctly, there will always be something that's just a little off, and you'll not know what it is. It'll drive you crazy, and often, more times than not, it's because the eyebrow is painted incorrectly. So really pay close attention to the shape and the value of the eyebrow on your sitter. So here's that little neutral zone as we're rolling towards the light away from the shadow where it was warm. We're going to hit that neutral area, which I'm painting with a little bit of sort of a khaki green color, and then we're going to come up into that eyebrow. Okay, let's take a measurement. Let's see how far from the lower horizontal line our eyebrow is going to start. And I've made a little bit of a line with the proportion tool, so I know right there is where our eyebrow is coming down to. And we're going to put some paint there to establish that is our lower eyebrow line. And I don't want the lines of the eyebrows to be too harsh. Emeline's eyebrow on this more darker side of the face is a little bit darker. She is blonde haired, so I'm going to paint it with a bit more of a neutral, sort of a khaki color. And also the eyebrow is on the upper part of the eye and it's protruding outward a little bit, so it's catching a good bit of the light. That's why there's that shadow below everything. There's another measurement from the horizontal line just to make sure that our eyebrow line is still coming along in the right direction. And we're just fixing some of those transitions as we roll over our cylinder and into our crease. Just going back into that upper eyelid area where it moves into the crease and making a few refinements. As you're looking at your subject, you're going to be constantly seeing things that need to be fixed. Fix them right when you see them. That's the best time to do it. Also, don't be afraid to pause the video and step back about 5-6 feet away from your easel and look at your painting. That is a great way to gain some new perspective, get a fresh look at things from your eye. Another cool thing to do is to have a little mirror next to you and just turn around and view your canvas through the mirror so that your brain is being tricked into seeing your painting with fresh eyes. So I'm noticing that I wanted to make the shadow area here in the corner of the eye a little bit darker. So we're going in with some warm dark. So when you're doing selective start, you want to try to complete a feature and have some surrounding skin tone there so that when you stop painting, there's a logical area for you to continue or attach to when you go back to begin your painting later on that day or the next day or whenever. So just make sure that you have some flesh around a more prominent feature area that you can continue on from. So basically you want to allow yourself about an hour for each painting module of Emeline's portrait, and each one of those modules is going to tackle one of her features, and then the last one is going to be a refinement module. So you could complete your portrait of Emeline in 6 days if you only wanted to paint an hour a day. But if you want to paint more like 2 or 3 hours a day, you can complete your portrait of Emeline in 1 to 2 days. If you are finished painting for the day and you have a nice bit of paint left on your palette, you can put that in the freezer and it'll keep it nice and soft for the next day's painting session. Just remember to take it out about 30 minutes before you begin to paint. And if you can't fit it into the freezer, then at least drop your palette into a Tupperware, an airtight container. That'll help. And if you can't do either of those, just leaving it out is fine too. I left my palette out and I worked on Emeline's portrait in 3 days in a row, and I was able to have nice soft paint all 3 days. So I'm always checking my transition and going back in and making adjustments as I need. You constantly want to be looking at your work and comparing it to your original reference image and making any adjustments that are necessary to get it to look as close to the reference image as possible. Now, mind you, I'm not looking to do photorealism here. I do want my painting to look like a painting. So the other thing I'm constantly thinking about is, when is it a good time for me to really make a cool brush stroke mark and leave it? So as you're laying down paint, try to think about mark making. And mark making is simply just putting the brush to the canvas and then flicking the paint on and kind of pulling the brushes away more quickly. John Singer Sargent was known for making brush strokes with bravura. And what this meant was he was just laying them down with no fear, no apologies, just a beautiful, succinct brush stroke. Now, we can't make every brush stroke that way, but towards the end of a more refined feature, those are the kind of brush strokes that you want to be laying down. So I was just squinting at my reference and then squinting at my actual painting, and I just felt like that the corner of the eye needed just a tiny speck of a really dark brush stroke, tiny one. And right next to that tiny dark brush stroke, I want to go in and reestablish that tear duct highlight. So when you put a highlight next to a really dark value, it's going to really make that highlight sing. Also, I just felt like that the line underneath that upper eyelash area, I wanted it to be a little bit more red. I feel like when I can push up the amount of red in my eye, it really does bring life to it. So I just put in a little bit of a too dark of a brush mark, so I'm just going to go right over top of that with the value that I needed. I'm trying to punch up the 3D effect of this part of the eye. So we're just making an area where it's the most rounded, it's the closest to the viewer, a little bit lighter, still keeping it cool though, because it is the white of the eye, and then darkening it and bringing it in towards that tear duct with a little bit of the pinky flesh color. And here I'm going back in and just darkening it a little bit as it moves into the back of the eye underneath that upper eyelid. Anything you can do to increase the contrast between lights and darks, it's going to really punch up the 3D effect of your feature. Slightly darkening that lash line and making it a little bit thicker as it moves up and over the eye and into the shadow area and where the lashes are a little bit thicker towards the right side of the eye. So I'm just continuing to work on the transitions and moving from that dark pupil into the outer corner of that eye where it's pretty much in pure shadow. Just constantly double checking myself and making sure that the transition reads as believable. Remember, with your transitions, you want to use a warmer color as you move towards a darker area, and you, in the reverse, want to use a more neutral color as you move towards the lighter area. Okay, we're going to come to the end of our first part of painting Emeline's portrait. We're going to have a good established eye. So I will see you in the next lesson where we move on to the left eye of Emeline's portrait. So here's a look at the finished right eye. And here's a little treat for you, the full portrait painted in time lapse. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.